Yes, yes, yeah. Yes, yes, yeah. Take a look at Africa and tell me what you see. Broken homes, empty schools, the depth of poverty. They're taking all the gold, they're taking all the diamonds, with no development or benefit to Africans. Greedy corporations, corrupt politicians, conniving against the progress of the continent. The consequence of ignorance is conflict. Africa, they taking apart for its resources. The politics of economics waste the profit. Follow the money, it will show you where the source is. Financial secrecy in underground economies. What's independence when we're living like we're colonies?
The year 2021 began with another major online event by TrustAfrica and partners, including Thomson Reuters Foundation, media personnel, and civil society groups. The idea was on amplifying and creating greater awareness on the importance of tackling illicit financial flows on the African continent and other development challenges confronting African governments. TrustAfrica and partners are using such platforms in providing a critical mass of journalists who will be frontline in the fight against IFFs. Highlighting the importance of the conference, Briggs Bomber of the TrustAfrica, Programs Director of the organization, says the conversation is critical for the socio-economic development of the continent.
From here, we are looking at taking forward that whole energy into strengthening our Stop the Bleeding campaign to stop illicit financial flows from Africa once and for all. This is a campaign that we have relaunched, and we are looking forward to seeing a lot more energy getting into the campaign, as well as a lot more concrete actions from our policymakers in terms of initiatives to stop illicit financial flows.
The forum also provided the opportunity for participants to discuss the challenges journalists face in reporting issues of illicit financial flows on the continent. For the Executive Director of TrustAfrica, Dr. Ibrahim Assal, says the question of how to finance development in the COVID-19 period is an issue that is challenging all governments and organizations in Africa. The pandemic, he added, has disrupted and eroded years of progress made in the area of development on the continent. The TrustAfrica Executive Director painted a grim picture of the increase in the number of people trapped in poverty, the dwindling flow of remittances, and support from development partners. Mr. Searle also noted the challenges facing both the media and civil society organizations in undertaking their responsibilities, particularly in the fight against IFFs, while suggesting some critical areas to be explored to stay focused on the task.
And with regard to IFFs from Africa, more specifically, collaboration between the media, civil society, and progressive think tanks is needed to both ensure accountability and transparency, and to create the political will that is needed, but also to adopt new policies and create new frameworks where that is lacking, and to make the ones that are in place much more effective. Well, I think we should remember that what we are talking about also, we should remember that civil society, the journalists, the media, and the research community are faced with enormous problems on this continent. I think we shouldn't be talking about them as if they are not. They are faced with enormous problems, including during the COVID period. They've not only been affected by the COVID pandemic, but they've been affected by the nervousness that one observes at the level of a lot of states on the continent when people begin raising issues. And illicit financial flows are quite sensitive as an issue, and accountability issues are still quite sensitive. I think we should remember that all the time. So maybe what we need is actually a new social contract and new social compacts where people agree on what is essential for our continent and work towards that in a very resolute way. And I think, and I will end on this point here, I think the media and civil society and the research communities and our regional organizations can actually collaborate and together, all of us together, develop what would be something like an ethical charter, something that everybody will sign up to. What is acceptable behavior on the part of companies, on the part of governments when it comes to IFFs, and make sure that governments, the private sector, and everybody signs up to the charter, and then their behavior is measured against what the charter says. I think that would be something quite important to do at some point, and the collaboration we have begun should be able to lead us to something like that, and working with the the regional organizations like the UNECA and the African Union.
In addressing some of these challenges and plugging these holes, Dr. Sal noted that efforts must be made to tackle issues such as IFFs and improved governance, transparency, and accountability. This, he added, can be achieved with the help of the media and civil societies in serving as proper watchdogs on governments. The Thomson Reuters Foundation has struck an important partnership with the TrustAfrica. The foundation is working to improve the capacity of journalists through training, media freedom, and human rights. The foundation has provided training for journalists across the continent who are impacting and promoting positive changes on the continent. Lauren Rasau of the Thomson Reuters Foundation explained some of the foundation's work on the continent and the massive benefits derived from these initiatives.
Through the program, we have, together with our partners, supported African media to investigate and report on IFFs and tax abuse. And there have been some significant reactions to IFF news coverage, which has been produced as part of the program. So, for example, we helped an Egyptian journalist a few years back with a tax avoidance investigation, which exposed how economic free zones were being transformed into tax havens. And this meant that the economy was losing on average $1 billion on an annual basis. This investigation contributed to some tangible change. Drawing on the investigation, the Ministry of Finance argued successfully for the implementation of stricter controls and a change in regulation. Similarly, in 2018, as another example, one of the journalists who took part in the program uncovered how cybercrime and digital technologies were fueling illicit financial flows in Ghana. And this led to a cybersecurity policy committee being set up too.
The keynote address, delivered by leading expert Professor Alan Mukungu, centers on the theme of the conference: institutional architecture to address illicit financial flows from Africa and the need for the continent to take on a collective approach in tackling illicit financial flows.
In Africa, we have experienced bloody wars where protagonists were fighting ostensibly to safeguard the wealth, assets of the respective countries. These cost lives, long-term relations, and progress so far achieved towards sustainable development. In a commonly noble way across the world, this was a demonstration of how seriously countries took the loss of assets, or wealth for that matter, and what they were willing to sacrifice to stop their loss or indeed recover them. Why then, I ask, with the prospect of the significant losses of financial wealth African countries are suffering, are we not seeing the same vigor, seriousness, and investment in efforts to stop IFFs and recover lost resources?
The two-day conference also witnessed presentations and testimonies of participants, including African journalists and civil society organization members, about their work on the continent.
I think one of the most important discussions that we need to have as Africans when dealing with illicit financial flows is to look at the low-hanging fruit. I think where we do tend to deviate a lot on IFFs is to consider many of the more complex areas of illicit financial flows when there are more simpler ways of recouping and limiting illicit financial flows. When it comes to criminal activity, an element of criminality, and that may not fully disappear. And therefore, limiting illicit financial flows is a key and strategic area that governments need to take.
But these multinational organizations, banks, they are not willing to give us information that we need. For them is the profit. For them is their stakeholders. For them is their investors. What about the general public? What about the poor masses? Those at the lower end of the pyramid. That will be the ones that will be burnt at the end of the day, because the level of development that Africa needs, the level of development that Nigeria needs, we are not able to achieve it. And then we're saying to ourselves that foreign direct investment is coming to the country. We are seeing the African Union, African Development Bank bringing investments into the country. But then we see illicit financial flows in which the monies that they are bringing in, one way or the other, is being taken out. So it's like pouring water in a basket.
Using its much publicized hashtag Stop the Bleeding to raise awareness about the cost of IFFs on African economies and also help improve the capacities of African journalists and civil society organizations in tackling the illicit financial flows on the continent.
Stop the bleeding. Won't you stop it? We've had